This is Bill McMinn from Makeable Bible Church, and this is the Way to Go podcast, where we talk about faith, family, and daily life, putting the Bible into practical, everyday terms. Welcome to the Way to Go podcast. Bill McMinn, along with Brad Bropes. So good to see you, man.
Yep.
I always call you Bradley.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. You go either. What do you prefer to be called?
Doesn't matter. Brad is usually just shorter, easier, and that's kind of why I named my kids that way. Benjamin, I can call him Ben. Elijah, I call him Eli. So I like the shorter.
Yeah, I did that for my two daughters, for Michaela and Cassandra. So then they could have the long official sounding names, or they could be Mick, Mickey, Cass, Cassie, and then there's Luke. He goes, what do I get?
Lou.
He goes, that's the long of it. That's the short of it. Just right there. One word, Luke. So he got a big, we tease about it. Actually, last Saturday we were talking about it. Yeah. Names that exact same thing that you said. So I've used Bradley on my, I think I do say Bradley probably more than not.
Whichever.
Yeah, that's how I learned it. But if you had a preference, I would definitely hit the preference. Yeah. For me personally, I always like to be calling people what they'd rather be called.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you're feeling lazy, call me Brad. If you're feeling proper, call me Bradley.
Bradley, right? Well, it's like Billy's different than Bradley. Like people call me Billy has a different sound from Bill. Like it's William. The only one that ever called me Billy was Grandma.
Yeah.
Grandma was Billy. Billy. Yeah, it's always made me laugh. You know what I'm saying? Every time she said it, because I love my grandma so much. So she'd have called me anything, and I love Grandma. Yep. But we're talking about raising our children today, which I guess first step is naming them, which we just talked about.
Yeah, naming them.
Very first thing.
Naming them.
But in Proverbs 22:6, start off children on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. And I've actually seen that come to fruition as a parent with adult children at this point. Yeah, train them up the way they should go. Mm-hmm. And even if they were bucking it at certain times in their lives, they always tended to come back. Mm-hmm. And so I'm glad that they had that biblical base in them to help to guide them in tough days, or when there's darkness or temptation or influence of others, they still had that nice, solid foundation under them. So I do believe it's important to train them, to set the expectations. So what do you think about that? I mean, training your kids.
Yeah, definitely. I think of Deuteronomy 6:5-9, where it talks about whatever you're doing, you're going to be talking to them about God. You're going to be, everything you go through life, how it relates to God, and tying it as symbols to their hands, bind them on their foreheads, and write them on their door frames, just continuously knowing why, where everything comes from, who it's from.
Yeah, they would put the reminders on there. It would be kind of like at one time I had a lamp. It was made a pottery company out in Philadelphia, and when I was in that area, it said, raise up your children the way they, or no, it wasn't that one. It says, for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, is the one it was. And sometimes people have that kind of stuff, or they'll have a scripture verse or something hanging on a wall. And that was kind of the thing. It's just whatever you can do to remind your children.
Yes.
And I do believe there are valuable lessons along the way, teachable moments that come along, but it is our responsibility. And I think as a parent, for me, my children being in homeschool when they were younger, I knew they were getting a good foundation. They came to church, they were getting a good foundation. I would talk to them about certain things depending on what was going on. I didn't sit around and hammer them all the time, because they're already preacher kids, so I kind of went a little bit easier. Discipline, no, not so much. I just made sure that my rule is simple. When I tell you to do something, I expect you to do it. I don't want to hear a lot of lip about it. I don't want to hear and I want you're going to do it right away. Like we had what we called first time obedience. Yeah. As soon as I said it, you need to be moving. Now, I don't have time, because if you're running down to the road, I don't have time, and I've trained you, I'm going to count to 5. Well, sometimes I don't have time to count to 5. Yeah. And so one day my daughter was actually on a ride at the fair, at the county fair, and she stood up. She was like 2-3 years old, and she stood up on the ride as it's spinning, which was dangerous. I don't even know how she could get out of her seat, to be honest with you. It should have been buckled in, but apparently she wasn't. So she stands up, and I was watching this. I said, sit down.
Use your dad voice.
Cassie, sit down. Oh, she sat down immediately. I know. I'm going to count to 5 right now, or I'm going to count to 10. No, there wasn't any counting. It's just when I tell you to do something, I expect you to do it. So that was, and then you would give moral reasoning too, why it is. But I just didn't make a lot of dumb rules. Like that's one thing. Yeah. And raising children, I wasn't going to have a million rules. It was just simple things. When I tell you to do something, I want you to do it. And I didn't harp on them about a lot of little things.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, that discipline, making sure that they know when you're speaking that it means, and if they don't understand, they need to listen at that moment and then talk them through it, help
Right.
them understand why this is what's going on,
Right.
why I told you sit down on that ride,
Right.
because she could have easily flew out, and
Right.
because kids they don't see that, they're not thinking that way all the time, so you have to be the parent and guide them.
Well, you can't let them do whatever they want. I can tell
Exactly.
you that. I mean, I remember my kids when there were certain things. These are your toys. These are my toys. And just setting boundaries was part of parenting. So, if you go to play with the knobs on the stereo, let's say at that time, which I don't even think we use that stuff anymore because now it's like little, wireless Bluetooth speakers in your phone. But back in those days, like, no, that's mine. You don't touch that. So I give them a little hand crack. Well, the great thing was, like, when my kids were in antique shops with me, everyone would get nervous if they saw kids walking into the antique shop because they're used to kids just doing what they wanted to and running the show. My kids would come in, touch nothing. And people would say, I cannot believe, like, your kids come in, they touch nothing. I said, because they're used to it. There's antiques in our house. They don't touch them. They're used to, they have certain things that's theirs, and we have certain things that are ours. You don't go in there. They're super well behaved. But that didn't happen by accident. It happened because you kind of teach them that way.
Yeah, like taking them to the grocery store, just grabbing everything. Can I buy this? Can I have this? Can I have this? No.
Right.
But in teaching them those moments, because like you said, they don't know. You have to teach them. You have to guide them. And like one time, my wife and I, Courtney, went to Walmart, and the two kids were acting up. And when we got out to the car, they said, "Hey, we were gonna get ice cream, but now we're not." And I said, "Well, we're still gonna get ice cream,
Right.
but the two are not,
Right.
because we felt Benjamin was good.
Right.
He should not be punished with them."
Right.
So it was a great learning point. Like, wow, we messed that one up.
Right.
So it was good for them to understand that but you shouldn't be doing this for the ice cream. You should be doing this as a way to just respect your parents. And
well, you bring up a great point too. I mean, they can't be grabbing everything. If you teach your kid that every time you ask for something, they get it, you're not teaching them to wait or to have patience. And you're letting them know, whatever you want, you can have. That's not life. You can't have what you want every time you want it. So teaching them the discipline and more what life is really all about, I think is important, to not every time I want to stick a gum, every time I want, every time I go to the store, I'm going to buy you something. Now that might be a grandparent role. Like maybe I'll do that, but as a parent, that's not the role that I would do, because you want to teach your kids that you don't get what you want.
it's not real
Every time you
real
want.
world.
Another thing we did when we were raising children too is I didn't pay you to work for me. In other words, if you went and pulled weeds, I'm not paying you for this. You're doing this because you're part of the household, not because you're here to get money and I'm going to pay you a dime for every or a penny for every weed you pull. I was like, you're going to pull weeds because we're all going to eat out this garden, and this is part of being the family. We have to do it, and we have to do it together. So there's always more that togetherness aspect of it.
Yeah, and I got that a lot with growing up, because my dad, I started working at a very young age. I started working around 8 years old, and on Fridays when the trucks would pull in, Dad would say, "All right, get the buckets and soap," and me and my sister would go out there and just start scrubbing, and it was a good learning experience, because he taught us hard work. He taught us, even though we didn't want to do it, it's a good work that he pushed and built into us, which was great, because it reaped great harvest.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's setting an example too.
Yes.
I mean, you have expectations, but he was a hard worker, and you got to see that as well, which I think is really important. But I have more reasoning in times. Like my wife, actually, there's some children running in the church the other day, and I don't want to tell you who they are because we'll put their pictures up on the screen. But I'm just kidding. But she sat down because she knows them from teaching and Adventure Club and things like that. And she sat them all three down and said, "Listen, I don't want you running because of elderly people. They might try to stop real fast because they think you're going to run into them, and they might trip and fall, and we don't want that. So in here through the narthex, I just want you to walk." And they said, "Okay." And they walk.
Yeah.
But they understand, there's a reason for it. And somebody asked me, actually, do I care if the kids run around? I'm like, do I care if the children run around in a gym after church? No. Do I care when they're hanging out in the one south hallway? No, I don't. I've seen balls whiz by my head and things like that when I'm walking to my office. I've always been amused by it. I'm glad the kids are here, and I'm glad they're having a good time. But if there were elderly people, or there's somebody they might heard to be a little bit nervous about it, then I think that would be another thing. But there has to be these expectations. Like for me, we're going to go to church. There was never even question. Like that was never this thing where every Sunday morning we had this big discussion. Are we going to go to church today? Do I have to go to church today?
Yeah, no.
It wasn't even a conversation. I mean, we all went to church. That's what you did. I mean, that was the expectation. So it wasn't a wheel I had to reinvent every single week. You're going to listen to me, which is one of the things I already talked about. Sitting at the table the entire time till dinner was done and everyone was done. It wasn't like one kid could eat 3 minutes later. He's out playing with his toys. Yes. He's out in the sandbox. No, we're all going to sit here together. And when we're all done, then we'll leave. And the reason for that is you take your kids to a restaurant. Yes. They get done in 3 minutes. What do they think? It's time for me to get up and play. You don't want to teach them for that. You want to teach them if you're over someone's house, if you're out to dinner, everyone's going to sit at the table until we're all done. Yeah. And then they get used to it. But again, they're going to go as far as your expectations.
That's exactly it.
Right.
And setting those expectations and making sure they know those expectations.
Right.
Because you don't want them to just be guessing.
Well, you're going to have expectations for sure, because guaranteed as a parent, you have expectations about kids picking up toys or children. Like we'd have our children pick up toys. And if you left them all over the ground, I was going to take them. I told my daughter one day, I said, I'm going to come back in 5 hours from now, 4 or 5 hours. Whatever's on the floor, I own. So if you want to still own it, didn't take me seriously, thought I was kidding around. I came home, I picked everything up. I made $400 to $500 off of what I sold. And that was a lesson. Do you know what I'm saying? Well, I don't care. I don't care what you do with it. I'm like, okay. And there were a couple of things that were important to her that I stashed away that I didn't sell for future days. But I looked at it and like, this is a learning lesson. I've told you and told you and told you and told you. I'm not here. After a while, I'm not talking about this anymore. Like, you need to do it. Yeah. And that's my expectation. And then that became a little clearer. Kids, when they had toys around, I'd put it in toy jail. And I tell them, your toy's in jail. And it's not getting out until this day or what have you, because you left it all over the floor. So then they would know Dad's expectation is we shouldn't have stuff laying around. So again, that's up to you as a parent to set that. And you're not being mean. I mean, I did lots of nice, loving things with my kids. But when I talk, I'm not here to just talk to hear myself talk. You know what I mean? I'm asking you to do reasonable things, and I expect you to do it. Yeah,
and I think an important thing is to make sure that you're not giving empty demands. Right. Where you tell them, hey, if you don't pick up your toys, anything on the floor, I'm going to throw away or put it in a garbage bag, sell, whatever you end up doing. Right. And you whatever you say, you must follow through. That's very 100% important.
Agreed.
Because eventually that kid's going to mean Mom, Dad's words, they don't mean nothing.
Right.
And you don't want that.
No, you have to be consistent in whatever you say. I was never one to make idle threats. I was never the parent that Santa's not coming this year if you kids don't get it together, because I always realized that's an idle threat. I'm not going to tell them they're not going to get Christmas presents. I'm never going to follow through on that. I would only tell them things that I meant and I was serious about. But they had this one bat. They left in the yard. I had to get off the mower all the time and move this there's just a little toy bat. They like to bat rocks and stuff around with it. It was in the yard every time I mow it. I got off the mower one day. I wung that bat across the yard and I said, you know what? I'm going to go get that bat. So I went and got the bat and I put it, and they love that bat. That was like their favorite little thing to play with, I think, at the time. And so I said, it's in toy jail. And I'll tell you what, when you give me $5, you can have it back. They go, but we don't have $5, Dad. I said, that's okay, because I'm going to give you a chance to earn it. I made them go sweep stuff, weed stuff, and whatever. When they did enough to get that $5, whatever it decided to be, I gave them their bat back. I never saw it in the yard again. Yeah, that was the last time I ever picked it up.
They learned.
They learned
quick.
They learned. So sometimes you have to do that. I think another thing is important. Okay, so that's train them up and set expectations, and you're going to have some discipline in there. But having a family hub, and I would talk to a guy, and he was a great guy to talk to, a successful businessman, had been a pilot in World War II, and just fascinating. But he told me, he said, look, always have a hub for your family. He said, for us, it was water skiing. For you, it's probably not going to be that, but whatever it is, have something your family does together. And I took it to heart. And so we made yard sailing something our family did together for years and years and years. But at least we had a hub. Like, we had something that bound us together, that we all did it together. So Mom, Dad, kids, everyone went and looked for stuff. Everyone participated at times. Like, we would go to flea markets to sell stuff. They'd have their own little table and they'd be selling their own stuff that they had bought. And they loved that. You know, I mean, I'm sure they'll have memories for the rest of their life of doing these kind of things. It doesn't matter, and you don't have to do that, but there's just got to be something that
brings you together.
Yeah, I thought it was great advice.
Yeah, no, that bringing it together, and because, like you said, they'll have those examples and memories, and even through that, there's a lot of learning moments that they're learning how to interact with people, like with the yard sailing, and not to touch certain things and not to always, like in the store.
Right.
And there's a lot of things.
They taught us too, Bradley, you can't circle your life around your kids per se. They need to come into your life. I was a picker, a buyer and seller, and I went to yard sales before my children were born. I mean, my wife and I did it from the time we were first married. I was doing this stuff in college even. So them coming into my life, they entered into my world. And I took them to do the things that I was interested in doing. And so they learned those things. The one, well, now that she's an adult, will call me, hey, Dad, do you want to go to the flea market with me? And some of my picking is actually because she wants to go. Yeah. So she'll call me and say, hey, Dad, I'd love to go to this yard sale, this community sale. You want to go? Yeah, I'll go with you. Sure, absolutely. Jerry and I will go. And, we have fun with it. But it was something they were used to. It was something that we did together. And so I always thought it was important to have that thing. And it was what helped us too a lot. The American pickers were really popular at that time. Yeah. We were we went a card that said cross country pickers. So to them, to be a picker was like really had notoriety because of big show that was super popular. They were out picking, we were out picking. So I think that helped with it too, actually. Yeah. But to make it seem like it was a cool thing to do for them. Yeah. And the other one too, I think we've alluded to, is just setting the example. So we have, raising your children. We'll train them up, set expectations, have a family hub, and then set the example, because how are your kids going to go past you? Right?
Yeah. They're going to go as far as your bar is set.
Right.
If you're always sitting on the couch, if you're always looking at your phone, that's one thing I really try to strive on is it's more caught than taught. And you always have to remember that. And whatever you're doing, if you're out working, hey, come outside with me. Right. And always involving them with that and not leaving them to their own device of
You don't realize sometimes how much you look at a phone. Like having a grandson, like from the time he's born, the first time he's with me, and I have my phone there. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't want this kid to see existence as I'm always looking at my phone.
Yeah.
I'll get out and take pictures of him and stuff. But I want that. No, when he's with Grandpa's not paying attention to his phone. Like Grandpa's actually paying attention to him. Right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because most people that are that will call me or text me on Saturday, they'll realize that Saturday is probably the hardest day to get a hold of me, because I just leave my phone and I just do stuff around the house, enjoying the time with the kids.
And there's me.
Make sure.
Calling you last Saturday.
Yep.
I did appreciate you calling back, because I have a question that was a great question for you. Yeah,
I didn't
so
get
I
it
gave you a call. And you called me back, but I was cool with it if you didn't, because I already know. I'm like, well, you know what? He might not have his phone around him. He might be spending time with his kids, and that's okay. I have a question. I did appreciate you calling me back and saying, hey, if you have any other questions, just get hold of me and I'll respond to it, because planting a tree, you're a tree guy. Yep. You've gone to school for some of these things, like you know a lot about it. So it was good to have that reference to say, hey, how do I handle this exactly? What about this? And so, I appreciate it to help. But I would respect the not too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I knew when I didn't get hold of you, I'm like, hey, this is cool. And Mark's the same way. I mean, sometimes you might get hold of Mark. If I have to text him or I'm thinking about something, I know that I might hear back from him the next morning. He may not see it because he's at home and he puts his phone down, and that's cool. And I respect that. So, but anyway, setting the example too, one of the things I always try to teach my kids that hard work and success go hand in hand. You can't expect things to go well and you're not willing to work at it. Things go well when you work at it. And typically if you have, and this is true of anything, if I go down the road and I see a garden that looks great, somebody spent time, like it didn't just like, oh man, their soil is just a lot better than mine because it doesn't grow weeds. A good marriage, same way, by the way. A good marriage, if it looks good because you put time into it.
Yes.
Nice looking house, nice looking because you put time into it. So I didn't want to teach my kids that things just come to you. I always wanted to teach them hard work and success go hand in hand. And that's biblical.
Yes.
That's Proverbs. Go look at the wisdom. You got to be willing to work hard. But I had to set that example too, which I did. And my children thanked me for it actually in this day. It's like, well, Dad, you set such a good example of working hard. And we feel like we've gotten that from you, Mom, and you guys worked hard and we worked hard. Well, guess what? I saw it with my dad. You know what I mean? And my granddad before him. I mean, these people were I just come from a family of that blue collar mentality. They just work,
Setting an example.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's just like I was talking about with when the trucks would show up. Yeah. At 8 years old, I didn't want to wash trucks.
Right.
But it was also good.
Right.
Because it taught me hard work. It taught me dedication. And also, you talked about not paying your kids to pull weeds and things, but I got paid for that because that was an actual job for the company.
Right. Right.
I think that's but it different. But it showed me that, oh, I get money now. And then when I would go to the store, if I would want something, my parents would also guide me, like, well, don't blow it all. Like, think about, like, don't just spend it on candy. And it helped in so many aspects that gets you ready for life, adulthood.
Oh, I agree. I mean, when I used to work for my dad and pump gas, he gave me money for that too when I was a kid, and I loved it. I appreciated it. But I was, like you said, I was working at 12 years old or 10, 11, whatever I was, at his business, at his gas station. So that was part of remuneration. But there were plenty of things too that we did to give.
Oh yeah,
you know,
well, because you're not paying rent, so what are you doing to live in that home?
Yeah, I mean, there's stories for another day, but I mean, the way that I grew up was hard times and tough days and no money, and everyone worked. Like, everyone worked to keep the family going. Yeah. And that's just how I grew up. I mean, that was, you're responsible. You have to be responsible. I love responsibility. You've had it from a young age. You know what I'm saying? It's just kind of, it gets inbred in you. But one thing I'll say before we close this show is just, even with alcohol, I try to encourage parents, if you don't want your kids to drink, don't drink. But if you drink, they're going to drink. And one of the big bugaboos I worked with teens for 17 years, and one of the things I saw could be really a hang up is getting involved with alcohol. I don't want my kids doing that. I'm like, well, the only way they're not going to do it is if I don't do it. It's just that simple. So I just chose not to do it because I didn't want them doing it. I wasn't about to do stuff that I don't want my kids doing, because if I do it, they're going to do it. Exactly. So if I don't want them doing it as they get older, then I can't be doing it. So it's just, to me, is a very logical way of thinking. And you can take alcohol, you can take anything, honesty and being faithful to your spouse. And what do you want your kids to be like? Now go be that person. We appreciate you tuning in and listening to the show. Bradley, thanks for helping me out. His first podcast with us, actually. So, it's exciting to have you here. Yeah, no, I really do appreciate it. So have an awesome and a blessed week.
Yes.